people think they have a conscience, but they don't. The sensation or noise that fills your head that you can't seem to stop preparing you before you do something that you know is stupid, telling you that it's not advisable to do the thing. You don't have to listen to it, oddly enough, but just go ahead and do it anyway, and then naturally, perfectly. The future will always come to an end, as your conscience predicts, so you can feel even dumber than if it happened by accident, because you know, I knew it was going to happen. I was told this was going to happen, and I went. Anyway, the funny thing is that consciousness operates within people, and we don't understand what the hell it is. What could happen if you followed your conscience for 5 or 10 years and then followed it to a certain extent? What kind of state will you be in? What sort of family might you have? What sort of relationship might you be able to forge? And you can be bloody sure that a relationship that's forged based on who you are is going to be a lot stronger and more welcome than one that's forged based on who you are now. Of course, that means that the person you're with has to deal with your full force in all your ability and your catastrophe. That's a very difficult thing to negotiate, but if you do negotiate it well, at least you have something. You have somewhere solid to stand and somewhere to live. You have a real life. It's a great basis upon which to bring children into the world, for example, because you can have an actual relationship with them instead of torturing them half to death, which is what is happening in a tremendously large minority of cases. Well, it's more than that too, because this is what I'll close with and why I wanted to introduce social instance readings to you, because it's not merely that your fate depends on whether or not you get your act together and to what degree you decide that you're going to live out your genuine being. It's not only your fate, it's the fate of everyone that you're not working with. You think that there are 9 billion, 7 billion people in the world, but that's incorrect. We're going to reach a high of about 9 billion people, by the way, and then there's going to be a rapid drop. But there are 7 billion people in the world. And who are you? You are nothing more than a small dust mop among the 7 billion, and therefore your actions or inactions are not significant. That's not true. The model is wrong because you're not the center of a network. You're a node in the network. Of course, that's even more true now that we have social media. You'll know 1,000 people at least over the course of your life, and they'll know 1,000 people each, and that puts you one person away from a million and 2 people away from a billion. So that's how you're connected, and the things you do are like dropping a stone in a pond. The ripples move outward and affect things in ways that you can't fully comprehend, which means that the things that you do and don't do are far more important than you think. If you can't teach people to stand up in the face of the things they're afraid of, and you don't know what the upper limits to that are, because you might ask yourself, if for 10 years you didn't avoid doing what you knew you needed to do by the depth of your definitions, right within the value structure that you've created to the degree that you've done that, what would you be like? Well, you know, some remarkable people come into the world from time to time, and some people do find out over long periods what they could be like. If they were who they were, if they spoke their being forward, they would get stronger and stronger and stronger. We don't know the limits to that. We do not know the limits to that. And so you could say, well, in part, perhaps the reason that you're suffering unbearably can be left at your feet because you're not everything you could be and you know it. And of course, that's a terrible thing to admit, and it's a terrible thing to consider. But there's a real promise in it, because it means that perhaps there's another way that you could look at the world in several ways that you could act in the world. So what it would reflect you now would be much better than what it reflects you now. So if your life isn't everything it could be, you could ask yourself, well, what would happen if you just stop wasting the opportunities that are in front of you? You'd be who knows how much more efficient. The Pareto distribution says that things that are 10 times more efficient are 20 times more efficient. You have no idea how good people are at getting things done. It's completely off the chart. Well, if we all got our act together collectively and stopped making things worse, because that's another thing people do all the time, not only do they not do what they should to make things better, they actively attempt to make things worse because they're spiteful, resentful, arrogant, deceitful, homicidal, genocidal, or all of those things all bundled together in a pathological package. If people stop trying to make things worse, we have no idea how much better they would get just because of that. So there's this weird dynamic that's part of the existential system of ideas between human vulnerability and social judgment, both of which are major causes of suffering, and the failure of individuals to adopt the responsibility that they know they should adopt. The two major problems that people face are suffering, tragedy, and malevolence. And so the other thing that you're responsible for is that you're supposed to look at the capacity for human evil as clearly as you possibly can. It's a very terrifying thing. that causes post-traumatic stress disorder in people who aren't accustomed to it. In the mythology that's associated with the encounter with evil, it's almost always the case that the entity that does the encounter, even if it does it voluntarily, is hurt by it. The idea would be that if you can face the malevolence and you can face the suffering, then that maximally opens the door to your maximal potential. And then the optimistic part of that is that this is why it's so useful to peer into the darkness. Let's say the optimistic part of that is that although the sufferings is great and the malevolence is deep, your capacity to transcend it is stronger if you set out on a path toward a goal, which you want to do because you need a goal and a path because that provides you with positive emotion, right? So you set up something valuable, which implies a hierarchy, and you decide that you're going to do that instead of other things. So that's kind of a sacrifice because you're sacrificing everything else to pursue that. And then you experience a fair bit of positive emotion and meaning as you watch yourself move towards the goal. And so the implication of that is that the better the goal, the fuller and richer your experience is going to be when you pursue it. So that's one of the reasons for developing a vision and for fleshing yourself out philosophically, because you want to aim for the highest goal that you can manage. You do that, and then what you'll find is that as you move towards the goal, there are certain things that you have to accomplish that frighten you. Maybe you have to learn to be a better speaker, a better writer, or a better thinker. You have to be better to people around you, or you have to learn some new skills. And you're afraid of that because it's going to stretch you if you pursue a goal. It is, and so that'll put you up against challenges. Okay, so all the clinical data indicates the opposite of safe spaces, as Jonathan Haidt has been pointing out, and what you want to do when you identify something that someone is avoiding that they need to do because they're afraid is have them voluntarily confronted. So you break it down. What you try to do if you're a behavior therapist is break down the thing they're avoiding into smaller and smaller pieces until you find a piece that's small enough. So they'll do it, and it doesn't matter as long as they start it. Then they can put the next piece on it, the next piece. And what happens is they don't get less afraid exactly. They get braver. It's like there's more of them you can, and here's why. Imagine doing something new that's informative, right? There's information in the action, and then you can incorporate that information and turn it into a skill and a transformation of your perceptions. So there's more to you because you've tried something new. So that's one thing. But the second thing is, and there's good biological evidence for this now, that if you put yourself in a new situation, the new genes code for new proteins and build new neural structures and new nervous system structures. The same thing happens to some degree when you work out correctly because your muscles are responding to the load. But your nervous system does that too. So you imagine that there's a lot of potential locked in your genetic code. Then if you put yourself in a new situation, the stress will increase. That's the situational stress that's produced by that particular situation that unlocks those genes and then builds new parts of you. And so that's very cool because who knows how much there is locked inside of you. Okay, so now here's the idea. So let's assume that as you take on behavior and heavier loads, more and more of you get more and more informed because you're doing more and more difficult things. But more and more of you get unlocked. And so what that would imply is that if you got to the point where you could look at the darkest thing, that would be the abyss, right? That would be the deepest abyss if you could look at the harshest things, like the most brutal parts of the suffering in the world and the malevolence of people and society. If you could look at it straight and directly, that would turn you on maximally. So that's the idea of rescuing your father, because imagine that you're like the potential composite of all the ancestral wisdom that's locked inside of you biologically. But that's not going to come out at all unless you stress yourself, unless you challenge yourself, and the bigger the challenge you take on, the more that's going to turn on. So that as you take on a broader and broader range of challenges and you push yourself harder, more and more of what you could be turned on. And that's equivalent to transforming yourself into the ancestral father of all, because you are, what would you call it, the consequence of all these living beings that have come before you. And that's all part of your biological potentiality. And then, if you can push yourself, all that clicks on and that turns you into who you could be. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed the content as much as I enjoyed creating it for you. Remember to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss any future videos. If you found value in what you watched, don't hesitate to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Your support means the world to me, and it helps the channel grow. I love reading your comments, so feel free to leave any feedback or suggestions for future videos below. Let's keep the conversation going. Remember, life is an adventure, and on this channel, we're exploring it together. So until next time, keep chasing your dreams, embracing the unknown, and spreading positive positivity. Stay curious, stay passionate, and always keep learning. Thank you again for being a part of this amazing community. Take care, stay awesome, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye for now.